Hello and welcome to the Expanse. I'm Mitch the Quack and I hope you're having a less quack day than myself. This is Ramblings of a Mad Duck. So I intended to do this topic, well, sometime in the future. However, because borrowed power has become the topic of choice at the moment, I figure I might as well just make this content now. How can lore help solve the borrowed power issue? Or at least how can it be kind of complemented by the borrowed power issue and the idea of removing borrowed power? So basically, in a nutshell, a problem that's kind of happened ever since Legion is that borrowed power has started to become incredibly detrimental to the overall progression of characters and just gameplay in general in regards to World of Warcraft. And as someone who has been playing Elemental Shaman for way too long now, yeah, I can tell you that is a very big problem for Elemental at the moment. As in, the reversion back to Maelstrom was definitely a good move, but our talents are still a complete mess. Some need to be removed, or should be removed, others just need to be moved to different rows, and others need to be made baseline. And our mastery, well, that either needs to be changed or it needs to be reverted back to the Cataclysm days where it was basically a meme. Or was it Mists? Either our mastery also needs to be looked at. But regardless of the gameplay stuff, borrowed power in regards to the lore of World of Warcraft actually helps explain and solve an issue that I think was becoming a relatively large conversation point around the end of WoD. And that general question was, how powerful are we as characters? Because by WoD we had killed Archimonde as players. And you could argue that it was a legendary ring that we kind of forged over the course of WoD that kind of ensured our victory over Archimonde. But at the same time, that ring was more gear in comparison to what came next in Legion. So overall, the general perspective was that 25 players are equal to the power of Archimonde, one of the generals of the Burning Legion. The guy who in BC, it took technically 40 players to kill. So from memory, I remember a certain power creep in regards to characters was a big topic at the time, which for all intents and purposes, almost became non-existent after Legion because, well, why did we survive Legion? Artifact weapons. Why did we survive BFA? The Heart of Azeroth. As in, the enemies we fought we would not have had a chance of beating without those borrowed power systems, basically. So canonically, the argument can be made that players have not progressed in power since WoD. Now, where this is fine and dandy for the lore, in regards to gameplay once again, borrowed power is not a good thing, or it's become a very detrimental thing to World of Warcraft as a whole. So the question is, how do you balance characters basically gaining godly levels of power in regards to the lore, but also kind of introduce a system or method which ensures that borrowed power isn't needed in regards to gameplay? The answer I have is expanding upon something Blizzard has already started to do, and a pseudo sliding timescale. Though to be clear, I'm not actually suggesting a proper sliding timescale from comic books. Now, for those who don't know what a sliding timescale is, basically if you've ever read a comic book, you'll notice that Superman, Batman, Spider-Man, the list goes on. They all seem to generally remain the same age, no matter what comic you pick up. As in a comic from the 1990s versus a comic from 2015 or 2000s, the characters generally have the same age. The reason for this is because comic books go out of their way to basically keep their characters ageless. And so every few years they'll either revamp the entire comic book series or just alter the origins of a character to explain why they are the age they are, basically always keeping them present. Now, to be clear, I am not suggesting something that drastic be implemented in World of Warcraft. I do not want to see player characters become some form of mortal gods that can just come back from death no matter what. What I am suggesting, however, is that instead of player characters being, how would I put this, a single character over the course of their existence, instead what I'd suggest is characters being implicitly generational. Now, to explain that statement, I need to explain something Blizzard did in Chronicle Volume 3 and how it kind of ties into this idea of making characters generational and how it would work. So, in Chronicle Volume 3, Blizzard did something completely unprecedented when it came to canon and raids. What they did was they canonized who did what raid. So, the Horde did Molten Core, the Alliance did Blackwing Descent, the Horde did Osirian the Unscarred, Alliance did Sithun. And I mean, even in the Battle of Desire lore, they also kind of did this where they canonized who did what side of the conflict. Now, what I'm suggesting Blizzard does, which would fix the borrowed power problem, but also just add a whole lot of possibilities for new characters to be introduced, as in a League of Legends level worth of characters just to be introduced within a very short amount of time, is take this concept of canonizing who did the raids and take it further. As in, start creating NPCs and characters that survived these raids. And this is where the generational thing comes in, because considering the current time frame of World of Warcraft, which, you know what, correct me if I'm wrong here, but overall there seems to have been at least 3 generations worth of heroes on Azeroth. As in, you had the first generation, which would have finished at Wrath of the Lich King, the second generation, which technically would have finished at the start of WoD, and then there's a third generation of heroes, which would have been from basically through most of WoD to the present. And the reason I think this is because, canonically, everybody technically died during the Arthas fight, as in he literally did kill all the raid, and Terrence did technically resurrect everybody, but I have to wonder whether that was more a boss mechanic instead of something that actually canonically happened. Instead it was more this thing of, he did help you within the blade, he kind of did shatter the blade, but the heroes did die. And so you could basically make the argument that canonically, Tyrion was actually the only one who survived the battle with Arthas, which to be honest I think would actually be pretty cool. That's the first generation, which you can kind of consider like the tragedy of ICC or something, right? Then there's second generation, which, okay, so someone's gonna have to like write in the comments and correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think the NPCs in the WoD intro are supposed to be, I think, one of the guilds, or like a world first guild that killed, I think it would have been Garrosh before the opening of the Dark Portal, like the second opening of the Dark Portal. And so all the NPCs that kind of like go with the Strike Force through the portal, like on the suicide mission to close the Dark Portal from alternate Draenor's side, all of them are supposed to be like raid characters. And all of them technically died at the start of WoD, because yeah, they sacrificed themselves so the rest of us could get away. So you could argue, you know, that was the second generation, like the last stand of Draenor or something. And now you're moving on to the third generation, which could turn into, I don't know, like the disappearance of the third generation, because I'll be frank, characters coming back from the Shadowlands are going to have to stay so tight-lipped about what actually happened in the Shadowlands, it's not funny. Because, as most people have kind of pointed out in regards to like a lore standpoint, if people find out what's going on after they die, or how death kind of works, the amount of social upheaval that's going to happen across the board in every single nation on Azeroth is going to be ridiculous. As in, I'm quite willing to say the entire planet's social structure and just everything that's been established would have to be completely rewritten from scratch, because people's reactions to such information would be extreme, to say the very least. So if canonically the third generation of heroes just vanished into the breach above ICC and were never seen again, honestly wouldn't faze me and could set up new NPCs in the future for us to meet. But anyway, what I'm basically getting at is, instead of players being recognized as heroes consistently, instead make it out that they are just adventurers, or they're kind of like Exiles Reach type soldiers that have just kind of turned up out of nowhere, or like risen through the ranks because of their heroism, etc, etc. Then over the course of a few expansions, you know, they kind of reach this point of where they're kind of recognized as commander, etc, etc. Then in the next expansion following that, they're kind of called adventurers again, which is kind of the indication to the player that, oh, something must have happened to this legendary raid team that kind of like did some heroic act, and now it's the next generation's turn to kind of pick up after them. This basically fixes borrowed power from a lore standpoint, because it basically resets who you actually are as a character every expansion, or every few expansions, without you actually losing your character. And from an RP standpoint, you can either make out that you did survive the encounter, or like the sole survivor or something like that, or you can just reset your character's identity at the start of that expansion. And where I am making this content with the main purpose of being a avenue that could possibly be taken in regards to removing borrowed power that's explainable within the lore, there's actually a significant amount of potential that could occur with this type of storytelling. Like, for example, I wasn't joking when I said Blizzard could basically create a League of Legends roster worth of characters within the space of a few months, if they decide to go along with this idea. Because let's be real here, there are a stupid amount of raids in the game, and dungeons might I add, and all of them required, in the case of dungeons, 5 people, and in the case of raids, 25, and in the early days, 40. And if you want to reduce the sizes down, you can make them 10. And in the later versions, you can make them 30, as in like go for heroic runs instead. And that's assuming Blizzard even decides to keep the regular raid sizes as like a canonical thing within lore. But basically, because there have been so many participants within these raids, the ability for them to literally introduce plethoras of new characters, side characters, main characters, the list goes on, is ridiculous. And what's really interesting is if Blizzard really wanted to, they could partially mimic the lore of EVE Online. What EVE Online is really well known for is basically having stories and tales that are all player based, as in every bit of like major piece of history and lore that is within EVE, other than like the basic setting of the universe, is all player based. And it's basically all retellings of real life events, as in the battles, the betrayals, the to and fros. It's all real people, which is frankly what makes EVE's lore so interesting. It's the fact that, yeah, it's all player based. Now, what Blizzard could do if they really wanted to is base these raids and stories off certain things that have happened in the player base and all the community of World of Warcraft around the time the raids happened. And or if they really wanted to, take certain aspects of major community members or maybe major communities overall and kind of just give homages to them within the story. So I guess a good example would be like the first time someone decided to ninja loot. You could turn that into like a comedy story or maybe a more serious story. Leroy Jenkins, which, let's be real here, should probably be made into like a canonical story in lore that's just a comedy in of itself, and or considering he is technically resurrected / comes back in WoD, you could make the argument that you could make it into a tragedy, as he may have actually got his entire raid team killed and he's kind of back there for redemption. But it's kind of this thing of where Blizzard gets the opportunity to basically involve the community in their storytelling, as well as basically creating brand new stories and having the opportunity to create so many characters that once again they could basically rival League of Legends roster if they absolutely wanted to. Now I will admit, this isn't all sunshine and rainbows. Something that would definitely occur if this whole idea actually happened would be that fundamentally player identity to an extent would be quite, well, reduced. As in, for the time of the raid and when like the raid happens, players could, it was me and my raid team who did this, etc, etc. But then retrospectively, when Blizzard comes along and kind of canonizes who did what or kind of creates a story around that raid, well, they're not going to have that vindication anymore. I mean, just for example, the end of BFA, where, the player character is the one that kind of puts the nail in the coffin of N'Zoth. Technically, if they were to go back and like start doing this retrospective thing of creating generations worth of heroes and introducing NPCs that are based off raids, is at that moment where the player character killed N'Zoth would eventually become retconned. And this isn't mentioning that trying to explain the Legion commanders, like the faction Order Hall commanders, would be a nightmare in of itself. That said, it is quite reasonable to assume that those Legion commanders probably were the survivors of Draenor. That kind of, well, fought the Legion, then, well, came back to have to fight them again, because, well, now they were invading their home. But anyway, that's kind of the idea / pitch to kind of help fix borrowed power, but also create a lot of opportunity in relation to storytelling in the future of World of Warcraft. Officially make player characters generational heroes, and over every few expansions basically hit the reset switch. And all the quote-unquote the raid team died / retired switch. As in, instead of players being a champion of Azeroth or like a well-known champion, instead they are now an adventurer again, kind of back to zero. They don't lose any of their powers, and if anything, the explanation behind why they're so powerful is that, the generations of Azeroth's warriors are kind of learning from the others and they're kind of getting more powerful over time. But the main thing here is that they aren't the same character that's just becoming slowly more powerful, and eventually just the point of where you're asking yourself, why are they OP? And so in turn, with that question kind of removed, borrowed power systems in relation to lore aren't actually needed anymore. And a stupid amount of relatively positive possibilities end up also becoming a very real reality. And I guess the final thing I'm going to add to this, which is highly topical at the moment, is if the Henry Cavill stuff does actually go ahead. As in, if they do get Henry Cavill on board and they are actually willing to make a film about Arthas, etc, etc. What this possibility actually does is create a massive opportunity for World of Warcraft and Blizzard and, well, Activision Blizzard as a whole to actually move into cinema and just TV making. And the reason why is because if they do make a film with Henry Cavill as Arthas and it's successful, this whole idea of World of Warcraft having generations of raiders and basically NPCs that are based on raiders allows for the exploration of stories outside of Warcraft. As in, instead of just the Warcraft 3 stories, which would involve Arthas, you can actually go into World of Warcraft and actually create stories around characters from basically every expansion if you wanted to. Original characters, I might add. As in, there will be the mainstays that are kind of like, you know, the characters we all know and love from World of Warcraft, but it also just adds the possibility of just new, fresh stories to tell within existing time frames, which honestly I think would be pretty damn awesome. I mean, I think everyone's seen the, what's his name? Hurricane. I mean, I'm pretty sure everyone's seen the Hurricane trailers, right? And just how hype they are and how good they are. Could you imagine if they actually decided to base TV series off these trailers? As in, they did a proper Naxxramas TV series about how the denizens of Azeroth took down Naxxramas, and then the opening of the Dark Portal in BC, and all the stories that could happen in BC, and then once again, going into Wrath, just that final confrontation with Arthas. Assuming Blizzard just stays to their regular storytelling, I think those series would be pretty awesome to watch. I mean, yes, we all know what the ending's going to be like, but if we are dealing with new characters that are raiders, that, if they die in a raid, aren't coming back, the question kind of becomes who's going to survive the encounter and your investment behind certain characters surviving, whether they get to retire, die honorably, you know, the list goes on. So yeah, I just figured I'd make this quick ramble because at present it seems like a very practical and opportunistic way for the stories of Blizzard as a whole to just expand overall in the next few years and create some very interesting stories in the future. So I guess the question is, what do you think? Because this is technically more of a pitch than a discussion, and so in turn, if you as a person who enjoys Blizzard stories or enjoys Blizzard's games doesn't like this idea, well then it's pretty worthless. So yeah, what do you think? Thank you for listening.